Hello, and welcome to this second edition of our That's a Good Question video podcast. My name is Tom Miller, and this podcast is brought to you by the Seymour, Tennessee Church of Christ. As the title suggests, this presentation will feature a question and answer format. So if you have a question you would like for me to consider, just send it to me at tom@seymourcoc.org. Our question for today is one of those why questions, and it's being asked a lot at this particular time. Here it is. Why is there so much suffering in this world? The question is usually followed by some other things like, where is God in all of this? Doesn't he care? Why doesn't God just put an end to this? He can do anything, you know. Well, those are serious questions. And I would say that the problem of evil and suffering is the number one barrier to belief in the minds of a lot of folks. They just can't really understand how a loving, all-powerful God would allow such things to exist. Let me give you my conclusion for the question answer in the very beginning. Years ago, the late Batsell Barrett Baxter wrote a little tract about suffering. He closed it by saying, "The problem of human suffering is beyond our fullest comprehension." Well, I agree with that. And that means that I'm not able to give a full, completely satisfying answer to that question today. It doesn't mean, however, that there are not some things to think about, and there are not some partial answers. First, sometimes we just bring suffering on ourselves. We just make bad choices. We make mistakes, and it's easy to see that. A young man may drive at an excessive speed and be involved in a wreck. Suffering may follow, even death may follow, and he can't blame God. He brought that upon himself. We have many examples of that. A person may choose to use opioids, for instance, to abuse them and wreck his health and maybe even lose his or her life as a result. We just bring some things on ourselves. That's obvious, isn't it? And sometimes suffering comes to us because we live in a world with other people. We do not inhabit this earth by ourselves. And I wish it were not so, but it is, that sometimes the innocent pay the price for the guilty. A man may drive drunk, cross the middle line, run into another vehicle head-on, and suffering follows, and maybe even death. And the people in that car that were injured or who were killed did nothing. They were completely innocent. But they pay the price for what somebody else does. A man may walk down a street innocently and be mugged, beaten, and robbed by somebody else. It's the evil in the heart of that person that caused the suffering to somebody who's innocent. Now, that's obvious, isn't it? We can see that. And I would say also that sometimes suffering comes as a result of the fact that we just live in a world that is governed by certain laws. And I'm glad there are laws in our universe. What is it that keeps all of the planets from bumping into one another? Why is it that we can predict when we will have the next solar eclipse or when Halley's Comet will come back? Well, it's because the universe is governed by certain laws, and so is our world. I think of the matter of gravity. Gravity is what keeps me sitting here, and I'm thankful for it. But what if I were standing on the side of a steep cliff and I lost my footing and fell? Well, the same gravity that keeps me sitting here would injure me or maybe kill me. God doesn't just step in and say, wait a minute, Tom's falling, so I'll suspend the law of gravity and everything will be okay. He just doesn't do that. And you think of something as mundane as a family that wants to go on a picnic on a particular Saturday, and so they pray that it'll be bright and sunny and no rain. And not far away, a farmer is looking at his field, noticing that things are dying, and he knows it needs rain, and he prays fervently that it rains. Now, what's God going to do? Is he going to let it be sunny here and rain here just so everybody can be happy? Well, everybody couldn't be happy. God just doesn't do business that way. He limits himself. But somebody says, well, God can do anything. Do you know, really that's not so. There are some things that God can't do. There are things that would be contrary to his very nature as God. For instance, he can't lie. If God told a lie, he wouldn't be God anymore, because in his very essence, by definition, God is truth and light. And he can't lie. Titus chapter 1 and verse 2 in the New Testament tells us that very thing. But I tell you something else God can't do. He cannot do anything that violates man's free moral agency. He didn't create us as robots who just have to lockstep and do exactly what he says. He gives us the freedom to choose. That very first sin recorded in the book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit. Do you know that tree was in the midst of the garden, in the very middle of it? God didn't put it on a hill where it couldn't be accessed. He didn't station cherubim around it to protect it. He just said, there it is, don't eat it. You'll die. And they did, and death was imposed. So you see, God allows us to choose. And sometimes suffering comes just as a result of the fact that we live in a world where we can choose, and a world that is governed by natural law. Sometimes those things can work against us. We say, well, we broke that law. No, we didn't. The only thing we did is prove that law to be true. And sometimes those laws malfunction. Sometimes a woman who is pregnant because of exposure to certain elements, maybe poisons, maybe pesticides, maybe drugs, has a child that's deformed in some way or that is born dead. And we say, well, God did that. No. We just live in a world where things like that happen, friends. And we have to deal with that. And we cannot discount the fact that we live in a world where Satan is alive and well. And instead of bringing good for us, as God does, sometimes Satan brings evil for us. His purpose is to destroy us. He, as Peter described him, is that roaring lion who walks about seeking whom he may devour. And we cannot discount the fact that sometimes God may send suffering to chastise us. The only problem is, I don't know when he does that. I cannot read his mind. I don't have a revelation. I know he's done that in the past because the Bible tells me so, but I don't know what he does today. Sometimes we want to know the unknowable. We want an explanation for something that cannot be explained. I actually believe that maybe why is the wrong question. The right question is what? It's here. We suffer. We understand part of it. Part of it we may never understand. But what are we going to do about it? How are we going to use it? Is it going to draw us closer to God, or is it going to push us away from him? Are we going to learn to pray, to depend on him, to be thankful for life, to make the best of a bad situation? Or are we going to sit around saying, why, and we can't really know? I think the right question is what and not why. And I'll remind you that sometimes people say, if you just read the book of Job, you'll know, because Job deals with suffering. Friends, you know what the book of Job says. Trust me. Job wanted to know why. God never did tell him. His friends had some bad advice. God just said, Job, I'm God and you're not. You trust me and everything will be okay. I believe that. And so I say to you, in the words of Solomon, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. I remind you again, if you have a question for us to consider, send it to me at tom@seymourcoc.org, and we'll include it on a future That's a Good Question video podcast. But for today, goodbye, and may God bless and keep you.